This Western story started with a boom town in the desert, built by silver and ambition. As Tombstone grew, so did the tension between order and total chaos. When the killing started, frontier justice was the only law that mattered. This is True Crime of the Historical Kind. You're listening to Part 2 of the Tombstone Blood Feud, Tensions Spill. If you missed Part 1, you'll definitely want to go back and check that out first. When we left off, Tombstone was booming. Silver was flowing, fortunes were rising, and the Earp brothers were carving out their place in the town's tangled web of politics, law, and business. Johnny Behan's badge gave him authority outside city limits. It also tied him to a landscape ruled by the Cowboys. Together, they had just enough legal authority and backing from Tombstone's business elite to make themselves a threat. On paper, the lines were drawn, Behan in the county, the Earps in the city, but the reality was much messier than that. Jurisdiction overlapped, loyalties were blurred, and soon, the tensions weren't just professional, they were personal. Behan's relationship with Josephine Marcus was unraveling in private and probably had been for a while. She was young, sharp, ambitious, and became disillusioned by Johnny Behan. She was weary of his affairs and broken promises. It just so happened that what Johnny lacked, Wyatt Earp seemed to have. He was controlled, calculated, and trustworthy, and Josephine couldn't help but notice. Now, Behan would watch his partner get closer and closer to his rival. What had started out as a jurisdictional clash now potentially had the added edge of wounded pride. But wait, Wyatt was not a free man. He was still living with Maddie, his common-law wife of nearly a decade. But their relationship had long soured. Wyatt's ambition pulled him toward politics and business, while Maddie's dependence on laudanum made her increasingly fragile and perhaps mentally unwell. As Josephine and Wyatt seemed to gravitate towards each other, Maddie was slowly being pushed out of Wyatt's life entirely. By the summer of 1881, Josephine had left Johnny Behan, adding a personal insult to an already rising conflict. Meanwhile, out in the wild desert, another rivalry was about to get uglier. It had started in a remote stretch of desert called Guadalupe Canyon. It was a narrow pass tucked in the Chiricahua Mountains, a smuggler's road used by the Cowboys. This group of cowboys included Curly Bill Brocious, Ike and Billy Clanton, along with their father, Old Man Clanton, and were camped in the canyon with a herd of cattle. A herd that they'd driven north out of Sonora, Mexico. Then, before dawn, a detachment of Mexican government troops crept down from the hills and opened fire. They had been sent to crack down on border rustlers. Old Man Clanton and several others were killed in their bedrolls, ambushed before they could even raise a rifle. The survivors scattered, but word spread fast across Cochise County. For the Cowboys, the Guadalupe Canyon ambush was more than a loss. It was also a humiliation. And revenge in the borderlands was a currency everyone understood. Soon, the Cowboys would strike back, in a place as ominous as its name, Skeleton Canyon. A Mexican pack train was winding through the canyon, carrying silver bullion north from the mines of Sonora. Yet, their convoy would never make it. Hidden among the rocks, a group of cowboys attacked, killing the guard and seizing the treasure. They drove off the mules and vanished into the Arizona hills, leaving bodies behind to rot in the sun. It was a brutal raid and a direct act of retaliation for Guadalupe Canyon. Naturally, the Mexican authorities were furious, but so were the Americans. The attack threatened to drag both countries into open conflict, and the papers called it proof that lawlessness ruled southern Arizona. Back in Tombstone, the fallout was immediate. The Earps, already suspicious of the Cowboys' growing power, saw Skeleton Canyon as confirmation of everything they'd been warned about. It was the perfect storm. The lines between outlaw, rancher, and lawman had blurred beyond recognition. In Cochise County, Everyone was armed, everyone was angry, and everyone claimed that they were on the side of justice. The problem was, civilization had to have rules, just like the no-gun ordinance in Tombstone. It was meant to keep peace and keep citizens feeling safe. But to the Cowboys, it felt like an insult. They laughed at it, rode in firing shots just to prove that they could, daring the Earps to do something about it. And the Earps did. Virgil, acting town marshal, made it clear that the ordinance banning firearms inside city limits would be enforced. The Cowboys continued to see it as provocation. Arrests were being made, fines were being handed down, and, of course, tempers flared. Wyatt, being usually the most visible and ambitious of the brothers, didn't shy away from the attention. He spoke openly against cowboy influence, positioning himself as the man who could bring order to the frontier, a stance that looked as much like politics as justice. As the summer wore on, the pressure only built. Every encounter between the Earps and the Cowboys carried weight, and whiskey certainly didn't help. It was like a game of chicken, seeing who would flinch first. Rumors were traveling fast on either side. Every threat, sideways glance, or insult was passed over poker tables, porches, and barbershop chairs. By the fall, it was as if the whole town was holding its breath. Then, tensions finally spilled on the night of October 25th, 1881. Ike Clanton could be volatile on a good day, but today he rode into Tombstone with a bottle in one hand and a six-shooter on his hip. He spent the night drifting from saloon to saloon, drinking hard and talking loudly about his complaints. Witnesses would later testify that Ike had said he was done being pushed around by the Earps, even blaming them for the events at Skeleton Canyon. Or at least that they profited from it somehow. He said that he was going to kill Wyatt, Virgil, and Doc Holliday, and he didn't care who heard it. As one man put it, Ike was full of liquor and full of fight. By morning, he was still drunk, still armed, and still itching for a confrontation. Word had reached Virgil Earp, who found Ike pacing down Allen Street, loud, belligerent, and armed, in violation of the town's gun ordinance. So, Virgil disarmed him on the spot, pistol-whipped him, and hauled him before the justice of the peace. Ike was fined, but not jailed, and that would be a mistake. Ike was released, but even without his guns, he kept storming through the streets, shouting threats, muttering curses, and daring the Earps to come after him. By midday, he wasn't alone anymore. Billy Clanton, who was fiercely loyal to his brother, had rode into town. With him came Tom and Frank McLaury, equally armed and angry. Like Ike, they made no effort to hide their weapons. They walked straight down Allen Street through the heart of the town, like the law didn't apply to them. The Cowboys ended up gathering in a vacant lot near the OK Corral. They were restless, defiant, and still fully armed. The Earps were watching from across the street, knowing exactly what it meant. The Cowboys weren't backing down, and neither were they. Virgil, as town marshal, made his choice. It was his duty to enforce the city's no-gun ordinance, no matter who stood in the way. He had already officially deputized Wyatt and Morgan, and when Doc Holliday insisted on joining them, Virgil deputized him as well. With badges on their chest and guns underneath their long coats, they stepped out together. Virgil, Wyatt, Morgan, and Doc were moving down Fremont Street with purpose. They were briefly stopped by Sheriff Johnny Behan, who stepped in the way, urging them to stand down. Behan claimed that he had already disarmed the Cowboys, though eyewitnesses and the aftermath would prove otherwise. The Earps didn't buy it. Each step brought them closer to the Cowboys, and to a moment that would change Tombstone forever. The air turned heavy, thick just like the desert before a monsoon breaks. The Earps turned into the narrow lot beside Fly's photography studio, a dusty patch between buildings hemmed in by fences and stables. There, just 20 feet away, stood Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, and Billy Claiborne, another cowboy who was said to be good with a gun. Virgil raised his hand. He ordered them to throw up their hands and surrender their weapons. What happened next depends on who you ask. Some witnesses swore the Cowboys reached for their guns. Others claimed Billy shouted he wasn't armed. One said Doc fired first, another blamed Morgan. Some insisted it was Frank. But one thing everyone agreed on, a single gunshot cracked through the silence. And then, all hell broke loose. Men stood in full view of one another, firing point blank in broad daylight. Dust kicked up like smoke, horses screamed and bolted, and onlookers dove behind barrels through doorways as the street exploded in gunfire. Wyatt Earp fired with cold precision. Doc Holliday leveled his shotgun at Tom McCleary, knocking him backwards. It was pure chaos, but in less than 30 seconds, it was over. When the dust cleared, 3 cowboys lay in the dirt. Billy Clanton, just 19 years old, was dying where he fell. Tom McCleary was dead, along with his brother Frank, who some said managed one last shot before collapsing in the street. Ike Clanton, the loudest voice the night before, had fled in the chaos, along with Billy Claiborne, leaving his brother and friends behind. The Earps had survived. Virgil's calf had been hit, Morgan was grazed across the shoulder, and Doc Holliday was nicked by a glancing bullet. And Wyatt, incredibly, he walked away without a scratch. The gunfight had ended as quickly as it began. But for Tombstone, it was only the beginning of what people would call the Tombstone blood feud. For the Earps, one thing was clear: Ike Clanton would be held responsible. In the eyes of the Cowboys, the Earps were murderers with badges. The next day's Tombstone Daily Epitaph declared, 3 men hurled into eternity in the duration of a moment. This wasn't just a local scuffle anymore. News of the so-called gunfight at the OK Corral raced across the country. Even though it hadn't happened in the OK Corral at all, it was in that narrow lot beside Fly's photography studio. But the accuracy didn't matter. The story had everything Americans were fascinated by: guns, lawmen, outlaws, and a frontier town in the Wild West. Yet to locals, the shootout was polarizing. It only took a couple of days, and Ike Clanton and his allies had already filed formal murder charges against the Earps and Doc Holliday. Judge Wells Spicer presided as witness after witness took the stand. For nearly a month, Tombstone hashed out the details. Testimonies clashed, allegiances divided the courtroom, and friends turned on friends. Some swore the Earps had fired first without warning. Others insisted it was the Cowboys who had done that. This wasn't just a trial. It was a judgment on the entire town. Was Tombstone a place of law and order, or was it ruled by whoever could draw their gun the fastest? Judge Wells Spicer had spent years navigating the blurred edges of politics and justice across the Southwest. First as an attorney, then as a surveyor and territorial official. Before arriving in Tombstone, Spicer had even worked in Utah Territory, where federal authorities and Mormon settlers had been at odds for decades. His time there placed him near the edges of one of the darkest chapters in Western history, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which will get its own episodes in the near future. But after weeks of conflicting testimony and mounting public pressure, Spicer issued his ruling. He determined that the Earps and Doc Holliday had acted within the scope of their duties, attempting to disarm men who were openly violating a city ordinance. So, legally, they walked free. But Spicer's ruling only settled the paperwork. It didn't settle the debt of blood. It didn't matter to the Cowboys what a judge decided. They wanted vengeance, and they would get it. So, they waited, and they watched. On the night of December 28, 1881, 2 months after the gunfight, Virgil Earp was walking across Fremont Street, unarmed and in plain clothes. He was heading back to the Cosmopolitan Hotel from the Oriental Saloon. He'd walked that route 100 times before, but this time, someone was waiting in the shadows. Then, suddenly, a hidden gunman opened fire. A blast of buckshot tore through his arm, driving pellets into his back and side. Virgil staggered and collapsed in the street, bleeding and stunned, unable to draw a weapon. People rushed to him and dragged his limp body inside the Crystal Palace Saloon. A doctor arrived within minutes, but Virgil was barely conscious. His arm hung shattered, with torn flesh and splintered bone. The doctor recommended amputation for a real chance at survival. But being the stubborn man that he was, Virgil refused, saying, "I want to be buried with 2 arms." Against the odds, Virgil lived, but the arm would never fully heal. His brothers Wyatt and Morgan were furious. They knew exactly what this was, an ambush and a coward's attack. The Earps believed that they knew the men behind it, Frank Stillwell, Pete Spence, and others still loyal to the Clantons. But there were no arrests or no convictions. Witnesses vanished and alibis appeared. In their opinion, Sheriff Johnny Behan did nothing. Was it a lack of evidence or was it something personal? Whatever the reason, the facts were plain. No one was ever held accountable for the ambush on Virgil Earp. The brothers knew they had a target on their back. And just 3 months later, on the night of March 18, 1882, Morgan Earp was playing a game of billiards at Campbell and Hatch Saloon on Allen Street. Morgan was lining up a shot, relaxed and unguarded, when a bullet cracked through the window, hitting him in the back. He collapsed instantly. Wyatt was just feet away and rushed to his side. But sadly, there was nothing to be done. Blood pooled on the floorboards as Morgan gasped for air. Within minutes, he was gone. Whatever restraint Wyatt Earp had left, whatever faith he still held in courts or justice or due process, died with Morgan that night. What followed became known as the Vendetta Ride, fueled by fury and vengeance, with no need for the law to be involved. Wyatt Earp gathered a posse with Doc Holliday and a few others. Their mission was simple: find and kill those responsible for Virgil's ambush and Morgan's murder. Just days later, Wyatt and his men escorted the wounded Virgil out of Tombstone, headed for the rail depot in Tucson. Word had spread fast that Frank Stillwell was waiting along the tracks, fully armed and looking for his own revenge. But Wyatt found him first. The next morning, Stillwell's body was discovered beside the rails, shot so many times that he was hard to identify. From there, the bloodshed only intensified. Next came Florentino Cruz, known around town as Indian Charlie. Rumor named him as one of Morgan's triggermen. Wyatt's posse tracked him down to a woodcutting camp near the San Pedro River. Hours later, Cruz lay dead in the dirt, shot and left for the vultures. The name that weighed heaviest on Wyatt's mind was Curly Bill Brocious. In late March 1882, the Vendetta Riders followed his trail to Iron Springs, northwest of Tombstone. What really happened there is still debated. Wyatt claimed that they rode straight into an ambush, gunfire bursting from the mesquite trees. As Wyatt later told it, he dismounted, leveled his shotgun, and fired both barrels into Curly Bill at point-blank range. Regardless of whether Wyatt's story was true or not, Curly Bill was never seen again. Another mystery is that of Johnny Ringo. On July 14, 1882, the body of Johnny Ringo was found slumped beneath a strand of oak trees in Turkey Creek Canyon, a pistol in his hand and a bullet through his temple. His boots and horse were gone, and his bare feet were wrapped in clean strips torn from his shirt, as if he'd walked only a short way after losing his horse. The coroner had ruled it a suicide. Ringo had been drinking for days and was last seen wandering alone after the 4th of July. Yet, parts of the scene and with the recent Vendetta Ride, many people questioned how cut and dry his death actually was. There had been a cut at the base of his scalp, his gun belt was buckled upside down, and his horse was found later with his boots still tied to the saddle. The theories were that Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday had found him to finish the Vendetta Ride. Wyatt himself even claimed the killing, then unclaimed back and forth over time. Yet that was never proven. Johnny Ringo's grave is now a historical site to visit. But back to the timeline, all that was certain is that Johnny Ringo was dead and the network of Cowboys had collapsed. The Vendetta Ride had concluded. It was a trail of executions carried out by frontier justice beneath the desert stars. Ike Clanton, the man that played such a huge part, lived a few more years in the White Mountains of Arizona, escaping the gunfight and the ride. By the time the shootings had stopped, the Earps were fugitives with badges, riding through Arizona territory with nothing left to gain in Tombstone, only a legend growing in their wake. So they left. Virgil was already gone. Doc Holliday ended up dying in 1887 in Colorado from the tuberculosis that had consumed him for years. Wyatt Earp rode out with Josephine Marcus by his side. Maddie Blaylock, his common-law wife, was found dead in a small mining town. It's unknown whether it was a suicide or an accidental overdose. Johnny Behan stayed behind for a while, clinging to what little political power he had left. But when Tombstone's fortunes turned, so did his. He faded from public life, dying years later in obscurity. And the town they all left behind? Tombstone had burned bright, a silver-fueled blaze that lit up the frontier. Like many boom towns, it went bust. As miners chased the silver deeper underground, they struck water. Shafts filled and pumps were hauled in at huge expense. But the deeper they dug, the faster the water came in. Within a few years, the boom was officially over. Investors pulled out and profits dried up. The thousands who'd once flooded into Tombstone packed their trunks and drifted toward the next promise. Its only saving grace was that Tombstone remained the county seat of Cochise County, a title that kept a handful of people in the town. Wyatt and Josephine's story lasted much longer. When they left Tombstone, they drifted west, eventually settling in Los Angeles, where Wyatt, now an aging gunslinger, found himself surrounded by a new kind of frontier. Hollywood. He gave advice to filmmakers on how the West really was, or at least how he remembered it. And this is where his legend gets blurry, because how much of Wyatt's story was truth and how much was post-production. The dime novels had already made him, or figures like him, a fearless hero. Hollywood just gave him a spotlight. Most legends don't live long enough to see their life portrayed back to them. But Wyatt, he outlived nearly everyone else involved. He lived until 1929. He died quietly in Los Angeles with Josephine at his side. She became the guardian of his memory, fiercely protective and somewhat of a revisionist. For decades, she defended their story, possibly omitting and reshaping the past. But when biographers finally came calling, Josephine's version of events took hold. Long after her death, the book I Married Wyatt Earp was published in 1976, sealing their myth in print. She helped forge the Wyatt Earp we know today, the calm, unshakable lawman standing tall against chaos. And for many Americans, that version stuck because it was clean and marketable. It gave the country the Western hero it wanted. Naturally, Tombstone's story was shaped by his. As the years passed, Tombstone became a sort of time capsule, a place stuck in its finest era. It was like a tangible stage where you could step back in time and relive its glory days. That single 30-second shootout became an industry, a story retold in books, films, and reenactments for more than a century. Tourism revived Tombstone. The motto of Tombstone is, "The town too tough to die." You can still walk its wooden boardwalks, step into the old saloons, some that are still marked by bullet holes, and watch live reenactments of the gunfight. Talk with the actors and see for yourself where the Tombstone blood feud began. This was True Crime of the Historical Kind. Make sure to like and follow, and check out the Goodreads link in the show notes to check out any related books. Until next time, bye.